China's influence over the United Nations is growing. It is the second largest contributor of funds. It also heads nearly 1/3 of leading UN agencies. The Chinese Communist Party now flexes its muscles in the heart of the UN. What does it mean to all of us? In the Communist Manifesto published in 1848, Marx and Engels wrote, "The communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions." As history documented, the Soviet Communist Party aimed to rule the human world using communist ideology. So does the CCP. How could communists achieve their goal of ruling the world? The United Nations is the largest international organization, thus an obvious and easy target. The Soviet Communist Party took over Russia in the 1920s. By that time, communists had already drawn their blueprint on using a world body to control the world. In his book Fearful Master, A Second Look at the United Nations, Edward Griffin revealed how communists built a world government. According to Griffin, Nikolai Lenin drew up the first sketches for this blueprint. Joseph Stalin and Nikita Khrushchev expanded and refined the sketches. While subtle changes and variations were added, the basic blueprint remains the same. Griffin wrote that Stalin laid down intermediate goals of communism as necessary steps toward the goal of global conquest. Here are the first 3 steps. Step 1 was to confuse, disorganize, and destroy the forces of capitalism around the world. Step 2 was to bring all nations together into a single world system of economy. Step 3 was to force the advanced countries to pour prolonged financial aid into the underdeveloped countries. The 4th step was to divide the world into regional groups as a transitional stage to total world government. The population would more readily abandon their national loyalties to a vague regional loyalty. The regionals, such as the present NATO, CETO, and the Organization of American States, would be brought into a single world dictatorship of the proletariat. William Z. Foster, national chairman of the Communist Party USA from 1933 to 1957, further developed the blueprint. Foster wrote, "A communist world will be a unified, organized world. The economic system will be one great organization based upon the principle of planning now dawning in the USSR. The American-Soviet government will be an important section in this world government." The U.S. Communist Party played a critical role in establishing the United Nations. Griffin described this role in his book. Earl Browder, well-known past leader of the United States Communist Party, in his book Victory and After, stated, "The American communists worked energetically and tirelessly to lay the foundations for the United Nations, which we were sure would come into existence." The April 1945 issue of the communist periodical Political Affairs explained the importance of getting the capitalist countries committed to this international body. It pointed out that since Russia would be one of the dominant voices in the UN, it could be used to prevent other countries from acting independently against communism. The Soviet Union also played a critical role. When the UN Charter was first drafted in San Francisco, the Soviet Union was one of the sponsoring countries and a permanent member of the Security Council. What about the United States? The Secretary General of the UN Charter Conference in San Francisco was Alger Hiss. He was a U.S. State Department official and an important advisor to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Hess was convicted of perjury in 1950 in connection with the charge of being a Soviet spy. He could not be indicted for espionage because the statute of limitations had run out. How do communists continue their influence? Many UN Secretaries-General were socialists and Marxists. Trygve Lie was the first UN Secretary-General from 1946 to 1953. He was a Norwegian socialist and received strong support from the Soviet Union. His most important task was to bring China into the United Nations. His successor, Dag Hammarskjöld of Sweden, was another socialist and a sympathizer for a global communist revolution. He often flattered the top CCP official Zhou Enlai. The third Secretary-General, U Thant of Myanmar, was a Marxist. He believed that Lenin's ideals were consistent with the UN Charter. The sixth UN Secretary-General, Boutros Boutros-Ghali of Egypt, was affiliated with socialist organizations. He was a member of the Central Committee of the Arab Socialist Union from 1974 to 1977. After the Soviets' Eastern Bloc collapse in the 1990s, communist legacies remained widespread in the UN. Currently, China heads 4 out of the 15 UN specialized agencies: the International Civil Aviation Organization, the International Telecom Union, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and the UN Industrial Development Organization. This means China controls nearly 1/3 of the leading UN agencies. These positions help extend China's influence in global decision-making and forward its agenda. For example, top UN officials, including the Secretary-General, have promoted the CCP's One Belt, One Road initiative. It is a global infrastructure and investment effort by the CCP to expand its international hegemony. The One Belt, One Road has left many countries in debt crises. Pakistan requested a $6 billion bailout from the International Monetary Fund because of its debts from obor loans. Others have been forced to cede control of critical infrastructure to the CCP. Sri Lanka had to lease a vital port to Beijing for 99 years to pay off its debt. The International Telecom Union, headed by China, allows China's state companies such as Huawei to exert pressure in negotiating global telecom standards across the industry. China is a country with a troubling history of human rights abuse. The appointment of China to the UN Human Rights Council panel sparked concern on the future of the UN's human rights agenda. One of the UN's objectives is to improve human rights and promote freedom. This is a universal principle. The CCP, together with other corrupt regimes, denies the universality of human rights. The CCP claims that human rights are the internal affairs of each country. This is an excuse for its repression of religious freedom. CCP's persecution of various groups such as Christians and Falun Gong is well documented. Evidence has also established the CCP has committed gross human rights violations against Uyghur Muslims in the Xinjiang region. The violations include mass sterilization programs, torture, and forced labor. The CCP has detained an estimated 1.8 million in secretive concentration camps. Most of them are Uyghurs, but also include other ethnic and religious groups. The CCP also expands the human abuses against dissidents to Hong Kong. With China now heading the UN Human Rights Council, countries with poor human rights records can become member states. The practice undoubtedly compromises the worth of the Council's human rights reviews. The CCP has bought off many developing countries, ensuring that any criticism of the communist regime's human rights policies has been shelved. This has prompted the U.S. to withdraw from the Human Rights Council. The West wants to promote freedom and human rights, but has been repeatedly blocked by communist countries. Senator Marsha Blackburn, Republican Tennessee, and Republican Representative Michael McCall of Texas recently introduced a bill titled the United Nations Transparency and Accountability Act, and it specifically calls out Russia and China and says it would expose any member nations that fail to uphold the UN Charter. When the COVID-19 pandemic started in November 2019, the UN World Health Organization, or WHO, performed like the CCP's puppet. As the world asked Beijing to share information on the origin of COVID-19, the WHO repeatedly accepted Beijing's version of the pandemic's origin. It should not have come as a surprise. WHO's Director General, Ethiopian scientist Dr. Tedros Adhanom, had won the election with China's enthusiastic support. He succeeded China's Margaret Chan as Director General. Chan spent considerable time during her term placing Chinese and China-sympathetic personnel into key positions. On multiple occasions, Tedros praised Beijing for its handling of COVID, that the virus is under control, and refused to take immediate measures to stop it spreading. He also resisted Taiwan's effort to contribute to the battle with the virus. In the first 2 years of the pandemic, close to 6 million died. In the U.S. alone, there were close to 1 million deaths. The virus has spread to 191 countries and infected over 400 million people. The UN has been accused of colluding with China to stall a Human Rights Council report until after the Beijing Winter Olympics of February 2022. The report is about alleged abuses against minorities in the Xinjiang region. The UN's Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has been working on the report for 3 years. The UN said there is no timeline for releasing its report. It confirmed the publication would not be ready before the Winter Olympics. This is viewed as an indication of fabricating a mutually convenient stalemate over the Xinjiang Human Rights Report. The Communists are making the UN a tool for advancing their interests. The world faces a new battle against the Communists' growing influence to dominate the world.